This happened back in 2016, but I can still picture that night perfectly, like it never really left me. I spend a lot of time in the woods just south of where I live, usually 4 or 5 trips a year. That particular weekend, I felt this sudden need to get away and be completely alone, so I threw some gear into my backpack and drove straight to my favorite spot. I'm not even sure if the path I took was an official trail. It wasn't marked anywhere that I knew of, and I never once ran into other hikers or campers out there. It felt like one of those places people either didn't know about or had forgotten. I pulled over near the tree line, grabbed my pack and hiked for about 2 hours before reaching the end. The area itself was nothing dramatic. No mountains, no cliffs. Just flat land packed tightly with trees. It was perfect for a calm overnight or two, but anything longer than that would probably feel dull. The campsite was bare bones. With several hours of daylight left, I slowly set everything up, making sure it was just right, and then started a fire. I sat there snacking on trail mix, listening to birds and enjoying the warmth from the flames. As the sun began to dip, I added more sticks to the fire. One thing that's always fascinated me is how fast the forest changes at night, how it goes from full of sound and movement to almost completely silent the moment the sun disappears. I sat in that stillness for maybe 20 or 25 minutes after dark, until something broke it. It was faint at first, drifting through the trees from far away. It sounded like old classical music, almost like it was coming from a record player. I stood up and stared in the direction it was coming from, confused. Was there another campsite nearby? Maybe someone was playing music, just way louder than usual. I stayed where I was and listened. At least half an hour passed, and that's when it really started to bother me. The song never changed. It was the exact same classical tune, looping over and over, echoing through the otherwise silent woods. Normally, other campers don't bother me. People can be loud, party, do whatever. But this felt different. Something about it didn't sit right. After about 30 minutes, I decided to move closer. I wasn't trying to sneak up on anyone. I just needed to see what was going on so I could actually relax and sleep. I grabbed my flashlight and started heading toward the sound. I walked farther than I expected, which only made things stranger, considering how clearly I could hear the music from my campsite. As I got closer and the volume increased, this heavy, unsettling feeling crept in, and that's when things started to feel truly wrong. I could feel goosebumps crawling up my arms, and my heart was starting to race. That's when it hit me. I'd only brought my flashlight. No pocket knife, no pepper spray. I hadn't even thought about it until that moment. After a bit more walking, I knew I was extremely close. The music was coming from maybe 30 or 40 feet away, yet there was nothing to see. No campfire, no glow, not even a flicker of light. Then I spotted it. A massive speaker, partially hidden behind a tree. That was it. Nothing else around it. I swept my flashlight in every direction, but there were no footprints, no tents, no signs that anyone was nearby. I stepped closer and examined the speaker. It looked old, something from the early 2000s. A bulky box with a faded LCD screen and worn-out control buttons. I found the power button and shut it off. Instant silence. The sudden quiet was unsettling. The whole thing felt wrong. Who would drag something like this deep into the woods? It almost felt intentional, like it was meant to lure someone in. Still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe another camper left it behind. Maybe it was a stupid prank. None of the explanations really made sense, but I refused to jump to the worst conclusion. I didn't stick around. I made my way back to my campsite as fast as I could, feeling a wave of relief when I saw my fire still burning. Being back there felt safer, at least for a moment. As time passed, that uneasy feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got stronger. I kept telling myself I'd feel better if my knife and pepper spray were within reach. That's when I realized what was wrong. They weren't there. My matches were gone, my cooking gear, my knife, my pepper spray, everything missing. My entire body locked up. Someone had been in my camp. I didn't hesitate. I immediately started packing whatever I had left. And that's when I heard it again, the music, playing from somewhere deep in the darkness. But this time it was closer. I panicked, bolted out of the campsite and ran toward the trail. As I put more distance between myself and the sound, and the music slowly faded, I started to feel slightly less terrified. I figured whoever was out there had to be near the speaker, which meant I was moving away from them. About 15 minutes down the trail, the forest was completely silent again. That's when I noticed something lying ahead on the path. My gear. Every missing item was laid out neatly in the middle of the trail, perfectly lined up. Knife, pepper spray, utensils, all of it. I froze. There had to be a catch. Before I could even think about grabbing anything, I heard sudden, rapid footsteps charging toward me from behind. I turned around, saw nothing but pitch-black trees, and took off running. I didn't stop. I left everything behind. I sprinted for what felt like 10 straight minutes, then slowed to a fast jog until I finally reached the road and made it out of the woods. To this day, I still don't know what I encountered that night. It feels like I barely escaped someone who was toying with me, like a predator playing a game. I've never gone back to that forest, and I never will. Back in Alaska, I once went on a solo camping trip along a trail about an hour north of Fairbanks, close to the White Mountains. I'd already been there for a couple of days, with my tent pitched and camp settled in. It was early afternoon, and I'd lit a fire to cook and relax when someone suddenly walked into view. It completely caught me off guard. For the entire 2 days I'd been out there, I hadn't crossed paths with a single person, and barely even saw animals. I didn't hear footsteps or notice anyone approaching, which made his sudden appearance even stranger. Still, he looked like a regular camper, carrying a pack and outdoor gear, and nothing about him seemed threatening at first. He asked me if I knew how to get to a nearby cabin. I hadn't personally seen any cabin out there, but I understood what he meant. Many trails in that area have small public shelters, simple wooden cabins meant for hikers to use briefly. They're usually poorly maintained and don't require reservations. It's just whoever gets there first. During my stay, I'd noticed a narrow offshoot from the main trail leading deeper into the forest. I always assumed that path probably led to one of those shelters, so I told him that was his best bet. He thanked me and headed off. I didn't think much of it afterward, just found it odd that another person happened to be camping so close by. I went back to my fire and spent the rest of the day taking it easy. That evening was meant to be my final night before leaving, so I wanted to enjoy the peaceful atmosphere while I could. It was around 9 or 10 at night, but in Alaska during that season, the sun never fully sets. The sky darkens, but it never becomes completely black. With the sun sitting low and shadows stretching across the trees, I noticed a figure walking toward my campsite. As he got closer, I realized it was the same man from earlier. He explained that he hadn't been able to locate the shelter. I told him it was possible there wasn't one at all, but then he said he never even found the side trail I mentioned and asked if I could show him where it was. That's when something didn't sit right. He'd been gone for hours. If he never found the trail, where had he been the entire time? I tried giving directions again, but he kept pushing for me to walk with him and lead the way. He started laying it on thick, saying he didn't even have a tent and that the shelter was the only way he'd have a place to sleep. I felt pressured. Even though something about the situation didn't feel right, I didn't want to leave him stranded. Reluctantly, I agreed to walk him to the trail, telling myself it wasn't far anyway. I slung my backpack on and started heading in the direction I remembered. From where I'd seen it before, it should have been no more than a 10-minute walk through the trees. The entire time, The guy barely spoke. We walked side by side in near silence, and the mood felt completely different than before. After about 10 minutes, I spotted it. The side trail was right there, exactly where I'd said it would be. There was no chance he could have missed it. What made it even stranger was that I could clearly see the shelter itself further down the path. It was partially hidden by trees and still a bit of a walk, but it was visible enough that there was no way he hadn't found it earlier based on my directions. As we moved closer, I expected him to thank me and head down the trail. Instead, he said it wasn't the right cabin. I didn't understand what he meant. We kept walking until we were practically right up on it. The place looked rough, but that's normal for these kinds of public shelters. You're never supposed to depend on them being in good shape. This one was especially bad. Cracked windows, rotting wood, signs of mold, like it had been abandoned for a long time. As I was taking it all in, I realized the man wasn't walking anymore. I turned around. He'd stopped several feet behind me, maybe 10, and he was holding a knife out in front of him. His expression was blank. No anger, no emotion, just empty. In a flat, lifeless voice, he told me to go inside. I tried to ask him what he was doing, but he ignored the question and repeated himself, telling me again to enter the cabin. My heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding my system. I felt furious that he'd manipulated me into this, but fear completely took over. I knew one thing for sure: going into that cabin would be the worst possible choice. There was still some space between us. I dropped my bag and ran. Strangely enough, he didn't run after me. When I finally risked a glance back, I saw him still standing there, knife in hand, watching me disappear into the trees. Once I was deep enough into the forest, I found a spot to hide and stayed completely still. I waited there for a long time, maybe half an hour, hoping that was enough time for him to give up and leave. When I finally felt it was safe, I slowly moved through the darkness, circling back toward the cabin. The man was gone. At least he wasn't standing outside like before. But that relief vanished immediately when I realized my backpack was missing too. Dropping it had seemed like the smart move so I could run faster. But since he hadn't chased me, it now felt like a huge mistake. Everything I owned was in that bag: my phone, my wallet, my keys. I didn't have much of a choice. I quietly backed away and headed toward my campsite. As I got closer, my heart started pounding harder. I had this overwhelming sense that I still wasn't alone. Then I saw it. My campfire was burning, bright and steady, right in the center of my campsite. I was sure it should have burned out by then. I approached cautiously and could see my tent was still standing. The woods were nearly silent, except for the soft crackle of the fire. I didn't see anyone. Then I noticed my backpack. It was sitting right in the middle of the campsite. Every instinct in me screamed that something was wrong. Part of me wanted to sprint forward, grab it and run, but I knew how suspicious this was. Why bring it back? He had to know I'd return to the cabin, realize it was gone, and then come back here. Even knowing all of that, I was seconds away from making a move. That's when he stepped out of the darkness. Calm, unrushed. He walked up behind the fire, tossed a few more sticks onto the flames, and sat down like he owned the place. I could even hear him quietly humming, like he had all the time in the world and was completely at ease. That was enough for me. I turned around, found my way back to the main trail, and pushed through the darkness until I finally reached the road. It took hours before a driver finally stopped and agreed to help me. Once I got somewhere safe, I contacted the police. The next morning, they went back into the area with park rangers, but they didn't find anything. My belongings were gone, every last thing. It was as if my campsite had never existed. Even the rocks from the fire had been scattered back into the woods, like someone had intentionally erased all traces of me ever being there. The rangers also told me that the cabin I'd been led to was no longer in use, meaning no one was maintaining or checking on it anymore. That experience stayed with me. For a long time afterward, I was constantly on edge. I stopped trusting people. I've managed to move forward since then, but I still catch myself thinking about how close I came to something much worse. If I'd stepped inside that abandoned shelter, or if I'd tried to grab my backpack, I don't think I would have made it out of those woods. This all happened just a couple of weeks ago on what was supposed to be my first backpacking trip of the summer. I had planned a routine hike along a trail in northeastern Wyoming, nothing out of the ordinary. The route was set up as a 2-day hike to a campsite, then the same 2-day hike back. I'd done plenty of trails like this before, so I went in thinking it would be just another few days of hiking. I parked at the empty trailhead and started down the path. The first few hours went smoothly. The trail was quiet, and I felt I was moving at a good pace. I had roughly 3 miles left to reach the first campsite, which I only intended to pass through, and then another 2 miles to my actual campsite for the night. Feeling a little hungry, I found a spot off to the side of the trail and leaned against a tree to grab a quick snack. I just wanted a short break before moving on, but as I looked up, something immediately made me uneasy. There was a man standing in the woods on the opposite side of the trail, motionless, staring directly at me. I had no idea how long he had been there. When our eyes met, he lifted his hand in a strange wave, meant to look friendly, I suppose, but it came off stiff and robotic. It was unsettling, standing there like that, silently watching. I decided it was best to just get moving, so I stood up and continued down the trail. I didn't think he meant any harm, but I preferred to give him a wide berth. I still had 3 miles to go, and the hike felt a little longer than expected. It took me nearly 2 hours to finally reach the first campsite. Even though I was only passing through, I decided to use this stop to have a proper meal and rest a little longer. I set my pack down, pulled out my mini propane stove, and started heating water for my freeze-dried food. As I waited for it to cook, I heard the crunch of footsteps on the trail. I looked up, and it was the same man from the woods. He had short black hair, a medium beard, and was wearing a grey flannel with blue jeans. Judging by his appearance, he looked to be in his mid-30s to early 40s. As he approached, he had a grin on his face, probably meant to look friendly, but it didn't feel right. Something about it made my skin crawl. He must have started hiking right after me because he arrived at the campsite way too quickly. As he approached, he greeted me with a casual "hello" and launched into small talk, asking about the trail and how my hike was going. I kept my answers short, hoping he'd move along, but my chest sank when he walked right up and plopped down beside me. His friendliness was over the top, almost aggressive in a way that felt forced. It made my skin crawl. I tried to eat my meal quickly, but he kept peppering me with questions about it, hovering like he wasn't going anywhere. At one point, he joked about my homeless meal, saying I needed better nutrition. Then he tried to hand me an opened protein bar, pulled straight from his backpack, wrapper torn, but completely untouched. I declined, obviously, but he was strangely insistent. Eventually he shrugged and said he'd be staying at the campsite for the night anyway, so he'd give it to me later if I got hungry. That line hit me like a wave of relief. He was going to stay here. I just had to finish my meal and leave. I ate quickly and told him my friend was waiting for me at the next campsite, so I needed to get going. He kept that same eerie smile plastered on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. His expression was flat, almost mechanical, and it made my stomach twist. I walked away, glancing over my shoulder a few times to make sure he wasn't following. I couldn't tell what his deal was, maybe just a weird guy who wanted to chat, but my instincts screamed to get out of there, and I listened. A couple of hours later, I finally reached my campsite for the night. The sun was sinking low, and darkness was creeping in. Even though I was exhausted, I had this nagging feeling to hold off on setting up my tent or unpacking anything. I needed to stay ready to bolt if necessary. Thank God I waited. Less than 10 minutes later, I heard the crunch of footsteps on the trail again. And then he appeared, grinning that same unnerving grin. I know it wasn't smart, but the moment I saw him, a surge of anger hit me. I'd done everything to get away, and now he was here again, uninvited, and it made me furious. He claimed he was supposed to be staying at the next campsite, so why the hell was he here? Foolishly, I asked him straight out if he had been following me, making sure my tone left no doubt that I was serious. He just chuckled in that sarcastic, unnerving way and said, "Yeah, I'm following you," all while keeping that same creepy smile plastered on his face. He tried to make conversation again, asking if I was hungry after the hike, but I grabbed my backpack and ignored him, turning back the way I'd come. I didn't see him immediately behind me, but I wasn't about to take any chances. I passed the previous campsite, my legs burning and my body exhausted, but I kept going until I physically couldn't walk anymore, probably a mile beyond the first stop. I moved off the trail, not exactly sure how far, maybe 200 or 300 feet, and set up my tent quietly. I left almost everything inside my pack just in case and laid down. Despite everything, the exhaustion hit me hard, and I actually fell asleep fairly quickly. But in the middle of the night, I jolted awake. Footsteps, crunching leaves, right along the trail. It had to be him, moving through the woods in the dark, looking for me. The sounds came closer for a moment, then slowly faded away down the trail. He hadn't spotted me. I stayed hidden until dawn, then wasted no time packing up and racing back to my car. I never saw him again. Where he went, I don't know. But thinking back, I realized just how close I came to something terrifying. That encounter could have ended horribly. The more I think about the protein bar he offered and the way he followed me, the more I feel sick to my stomach. Whatever his intentions were, they were definitely not good.